Oh my goodness, there is less than a week to go until Rhinebeck and I am so excited. I mean, crushingly underprepared, but so excited! Hello Pickles and welcome to episode 31 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly on Instagram and Ravelry as dunderknit. I'm a knitter living in London, and if this is your first time joining us here on the podcast, a huge hello and welcome to you. I very much hope that you're well. Now, I do always like to let you know up front, just in case you're a new viewer and you are a little bit sensitive to the sweary language, this podcast has a bit of a tendency to be a little chock full of that. So if swears are not your thing, I totally understand. This will not be the podcast for you, but thanks so much for giving us a try. But for the rest of you who are either sweary or entirely tolerant to it, I really do hope you're well and welcome back. As I mentioned right up front, Rhinebeck is very, very nearly upon us. It's Sunday the 13th of October here in the UK. Today, I am going to attempt to film, edit and upload all in one day, as I do sometimes when I'm feeling ambitious. However, I would hasten to say that today it's less about ambition and more about requirement, because I am running a little short on time to get done everything that I need to ahead of heading over to the US later on this week. I am working some of this week. Those days I am anticipating are going to be fairly fucking full on the basis of the fact that there is a lot to get done before I go, and I'd like to leave it so that as much of that gets done as possible, so I'm not landing it on my team while I'm out. But yes, quite a few things to do and to run past today. I should say right up front as well that I appreciate not everyone who watches this podcast is going to Rhinebeck. Perhaps it's just not on the cards for you this year. Perhaps it's not something that you're that excited about. Perhaps fibre festivals aren't your thing, crowds aren't your thing, or perhaps you just live in a location that doesn't allow you to get there quickly, easily, expediently, cheaply, whatever these things may be. I totally appreciate that, and for the longest time I was entirely with you on that as well. If you've been around with the podcast since the start, and I'll come back to that in a second, you will probably know that this time last year I was so excited about Rhinebeck and mentioned it so many times that it became an informal drinking game. And for those of you who wish to play along at home, I make no apologies in advance for how hammered you're going to be at the end of this episode. Because it's inevitable, whether it's enthusiasm, whether it's necessity, or whether it's just pure unbridled joy. I'm gonna Rhinebeck, I'm sorry, I can't, tough. But you know, whether you're drinking a soft drink, whether you're drinking a hot beverage, or whether you're drinking something much harder, faster and designed to get you a little bit sozzled, I do hope you enjoy this week's episode. I want to say as well a massive thank you to every single person who watched the previous episode, comment on it, sent me good wishes for it. As I mentioned last time round, it was the 1 year anniversary of the podcast. That means we have all been knitting vicariously for at least a year. Some of us far longer, based on the amount of time and energy we have to expend on these things. But yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you. I spent a large part of last episode gushing about how wonderful you all are. I will, refrain from doing it too much again, but please know it's appreciated, and each and every one of you, it just fucking legends, the lot of you. Excellent. But a couple of announcements and bits to cover off up front. The first of those is around our glorious Goldalong, which will be coming to an end next weekend. Next weekend, which is the 19th and 20th of October, coincides with Rhinebeck weekend. I might have mentioned this. And a large part of why we're doing the Glorious Goldalong is to allow those of us both at and not at Rhinebeck to embrace a little bit of solidarity on the day, to wear our little notion of gold such that it can kind of bind us together and have some solidarity around knitting vicariously and indeed all things gold at Rhinebeck. So I would would absolutely love it if those of you who aren't attending Rhinebeck in person would wear or bring with you your little bit of gold that you've been working on next Saturday, the 19th of October, and would take great delight in sharing that, whether that be over on Ravelry in the Glorious Goldalong thread, or indeed whether it be over on Instagram with the Glorious Goldalong hashtag. It would just be absolutely wonderful. And as I say, large part of why we're doing this is so that we can have a feeling of solidarity and community within the amazing Knitting Vicariously group, whether you be attending Rhinebeck or not. So if you would love to do that, I would very much love to see it. Now, to those of you who are attending Rhinebeck in person, again, we sort of mentioned up front that one of the reasons we might like to try and do this gold along and wear the gold on that day is such that if you're not super comfortable with coming up and saying hello to a random stranger, and I appreciate my strangeness and being a stranger, those are not necessarily the same things, but let's address them single-mindedly. So yeah, if you're not comfortable coming up and saying hi, I totally appreciate it, I get it. Feel free to wear your little bit of gold, flash your little bit of gold in my general direction if you'd like to say hi and just not worry too much about being sort of all up in your business. But similarly, if you do want to come up, say hi, have a hug, whatever, that would be absolutely wonderful. The intention at this point is still for us to have a little bit of a Glorious Goldalong meetup. I mentioned last time round, and certainly no one's come back saying it does or doesn't work for them, so I'm hopeful this is going to work for us. But at 1:30 on Saturday, so Saturday the 19th, I would love anyone and everyone who wants to come along and say hi, whether or not you're gloriously goldified. That would be delightful. I will be on the hill at Rhinebeck, which is just inside the main entrance on the left-hand side, curving up towards, you've got the sort of ABC barns up on one side and the hill is over on the left-hand side as you go in. I'm conscious that the camera may have flipped that, so ignore my hand signals and very much just ask people once you're there if you're unclear on where to go. The hill is also where I believe the podcaster meetup takes place, and indeed the Ravelry meetup. I'm not entirely sure of the details of those and when they're going ahead, but I will certainly be there around about 1:30, if not perhaps a tiny bit earlier, just depending on how I'm getting on. But yeah, 1:30 on the hill, we will gloriously gold along, we will knit vicariously, and just generally, if you want to say hi, it would be lovely to see you there. But please don't feel that interactions need to be restricted to that. As I mentioned last year, I give hugs liberally and with zero judgment, and therefore if you do want to come up and say hi at any point during the festival, please do feel free. If I am a tiny bit distracted, it's possibly related to a lack of caffeine, which I'm going to endeavour to ensure is peaking at all times. Dehydration, which is somewhat linked to the lack of caffeine, but also, you know, genuinely stay hydrated, people. It is one of those things that I overlook at festivals, so word to the wise. Or indeed, I've just been woefully distracted by a skein of yarn, and much as I'm enjoying our interaction, I'm just going to need to go, ooh, and steal it. Not steal it, hold it, hang on to it, pay for it in due course. Not steal it. Don't do that at Rhinebeck. That's a horrible thing to do. I wouldn't believe for a second that any of you would. But yes, if I am in any way distracted, it's probably one of those things. But yeah, all I would say is if you do want to come up and say hi, that would be delightful. If you don't, that's equally fine. I don't mind. I'm not going to judge you for it. We're good. We're good. For those of you unable to attend in person, as I've mentioned previously, we will be having a repeat of our Vicarious Rhinebecking thread over on Ravelry. This is where those of you who aren't able to attend are able to post an entry in the Vicarious Rhinebecking thread. It is one post per person, it will be limited to that, but what I ask you to do is pop into that thread and just give a few details around how you're looking to celebrate or embrace the spirit of all things knitty and kind of community related next weekend, when perhaps you're just not able to make Rhinebeck for whatever reasons, but perhaps you're able to embrace a little bit of it vicariously, as we are so often want to do. What I'll be doing with that thread is I will be pulling together a little package of prizes and goodies of things that catch my eye while I'm at Rhinebeck. That will form a prize package, and I will pick an entry at random from that thread, and that prize package will go to that lucky winner. So if you do want to take part, that would be delightful. I will be opening a thread, the link to which will be in the description box below. It's in our Ravelry group. Please do feel free to join if you're not already a member, and enter in your prompt there. I will have the prompt in the thread, so yeah, take a look, see how others are spending their weekend, and please do feel free to enter yourself for a chance at winning those goodies. If at any point you do want to follow along with my Rhinebeck antics, I appreciate that not everyone is on Instagram. However, that is going to be the best place for you to check out what I am up to in reasonably real time. I will say, for anyone who's not aware, you don't have to be a member of Instagram to be able to see what's happening on people's profiles. My profile is, as I mentioned right up front, dunderknit. If you go to instagram.com/dunderknit, you should be able to see my images, some of my stories from the day, and so even those of you without an Instagram account, you should be able to follow along. I am not yet 100% sure if I'm going to be vlogging next weekend. I have thought about it. I want to commit to trying to get some footage from over the course of the weekend, but I also know that between meeting up and seeing people, and indeed just trying to get round the place, because Rhinebeck is huge, as I discovered last year. I was there for pretty much the full 2 days, and I'm still not convinced I saw all of it. So there is a lot to see. I don't really want to commit either way on it. I will definitely try my best. I will have some footage to share. I'm just not sure I'm going to call it a fully fledged and complete vlog of the entirety of the weekend's events, but fingers crossed I will be able to take you along a little bit, even if it's on Instagram rather than a full vlog experience. In terms of specific plans, I will be heading to Indie Untangled on Friday. I believe we have tickets for the noon until 2 p.m. time slot. That is certainly a bit of a rush. There's quite a few things to see and to try and get round, but I'm very much looking forward to that. I'm not entirely sure about plans for that afternoon, but I will say to anyone who is attending and who has lusted after the Tanny Casey project bags that I keep showing you, and I will continue to keep showing you because I love them, Tanny Casey is going to be vending at the Rhinebeck Yarn Bazaar event, which is a new event being set up also on the Friday afternoon. I believe it is in Rhinebeck itself. I'd recommend you have a quick look at the website. I will endeavour to link that below. They also have an Instagram account, which I believe is Rhinebeck Yarn Bazaar, and so do check that out if you want to see Squish and indeed try and get hold of some of her bags in person. That feels like an excellent way of doing so. But look, enough prattling on up front, because I'm sure that there will be plenty mentions and enough to get you entirely sozzled with the talk of Rhinebeck throughout the rest of this episode. But let's move on to the meat of the podcast proper. Everything that I talk about, as I've referenced before, will be in the description box below, as well as over in our Ravelry group, where I have show notes for each and every episode. You can find the Ravelry group by searching for Knitting Vicariously on Ravelry, and similarly you can also find us over on Instagram, where if you don't want to follow along with the general day-to-day runnings of my life with some random what I'm doing posts in my stories and occasional stop, drop and selfies, which I love it when people tag me for those, but more often than not they tag me when I'm asleep. So that does make it a little bit harder and less fun for everyone concerned. So if you do want to follow along, there is the Knitting Vicariously Instagram account where I post links to the makers that are mentioned in this episode and relevant hashtags as well. But look, let's make no more bones about it. I have a lovely little pile of gold things. Look at how pretty it is, that are all coming with me later on this week. Some are going to be worn, some are going to be worked on. This is a little bit of a misnomer because this is only partly gold, but we'll come to that later. But right up front, I also have a what I'm wearing /FO because I finished my farmhouse cardigan. Yes, I did. Let me put these to one side and I'll show you it properly. So yes, this is my second Rhinebeck sweater. I have both of them done and off the needles and with time to spare, and I'm so unbearably smug about it. The only thing I still have to do with this cardigan is give it a good blocking, but in the interest of getting it up on the podcast and shown to you before I do that, because it would have been rather too damp to do it afterwards, I thought I would show it off pre-blocking. So let me just remind you of the pattern itself. This is the Farmhouse Cardigan by Amy Christoffers, who I believe is Savoury Knitting, is the sort of brand that she publishes under. I've talked a little bit about this pattern in previous weeks. This is a cardigan that a few of my friends are knitting in support and solidarity of another friend of ours who is Connie, and Connie knit a wonderful farmhouse cardigan in this electric, like chartreuse green, amazing colourway earlier on in this year to attend the Vogue Knitting Live Festival in New York. She did not attend the festival in the end, and posted on Instagram her reasons for doing so, and so we decided that we wanted to knit some farmhouse cardigans for Rhinebeck in support of our wonderful, wonderful friend. And so let me stand up and give you a very quick show. So here you have it. This is my farmhouse cardigan. Now, as I mentioned, it is not yet blocked. I'm expecting that it will sort of loosen up a little bit with blocking. As it is, it feels very kind of, not very dense, but it certainly feels as though it just needs a bit of a relax. It's quite kind of, I want to say, I mean, dense is quite a good word for it, but it feels just a little bit like, words today, people, words. It feels a tiny bit stiff, and certainly I know that the gauge will sort of loosen up a little bit when I do wash it. Now, what I'm going to say up front is I didn't realise when I put this t-shirt on that it's quite so transparent as it is. So you're going to excuse me if I keep this cardigan fairly closely held at the front, because frankly, that's not that's not something that anyone needs to see. So I will say that, of course, I don't have buttons for this. I mentioned in a previous episode that I very rarely button up my cardigans. I mean, wearing a slightly see-through t-shirt underneath would have been the one instance where that might have occurred to me, but there you go. You live and learn. So in terms of the cardigan itself, it hits me bang on mid-hip as I prefer. I'm expecting that with blocking that will lengthen ever so slightly, but not too much. It has these little pockets, and I do mean little pockets because there's not a huge amount that can fit in there. I think maybe, let's just check. You know, we might be able to get a little phone in there. We might be, I mean, a little phone, it's an iPhone, so there you go. That's to scale for you there. So not exactly huge, it's fair to say, but enough to kind of keep your pockets in. Yeah, see? Yeah, could have changed my t-shirt, didn't think that far ahead, too short on time. So the textured pattern of the cardigan continues the whole way round. It is knit, as you will have seen in the progress shots, bottom up. You start down here at the bottom at the ribbing, and I used, I think, just a kind of fairly standard alternating cable cast on to make it nice and stretchy. You then knit up, you knit the little insides of the pockets, which as you can see are in plain stockinette. You knit the insides of those. You can use them as a little gauge swatch. Just a little tip for you there. And then you will work up from the bottom of the cardigan to the underarms here. You then have your sleeves that you knit bottom up separately. You attach those and then knit the yoke of the sweater back and forward. And as part of that, yeah, you kind of get up to this collar. Now, the collar is really interesting. It goes up and the whole way around. Hello. So the collar and the button band are included as you go. There's no picking up of stitches afterwards to make that a painful process, which is great. But then you do end up doing essentially, let me move my hair out of the way so you can see. This is a flattering angle for everyone concerned, isn't it? I could actually sit down and show you this bit. Let me do that instead. There we are. That's a little bit better. So as I mentioned, the collar kind of wraps up and round here at the back. And so what I will do is, let me just move my hair and see if I can show you this properly. You're going to have to deal with the fact that I have to turn around to do this because, you know, professional. So as you might be able to see, it has a really high collar up here at the back. So you end up knitting up in this direction and up in this direction separately. So even though you've kind of finished the yoke at the back of the sweater, you're knitting those two panels up separately with some, not really sort of short rows, just kind of back and forth. And then there's a bit of seaming that you do at the end. I ended up using a 3-needle bind off, but as you can see, the collar comes up very, very high at the back of the neck. Now, there are some positives associated with that. One, it means it's really cozy and it just feels so kind of big and snuggly, and it's a lovely, lovely just coziness. And I will say that for some cardigans, particularly raglans out there, you tend to find the neck sort of drops away a little bit at the back, so it's quite nice to have a little cowl or something on with it just to make sure you're feeling cozy. This does not suffer from that problem at all. It is lovely and snuggly. But I will say, for people like myself who have long hair, it is also a bit of a double-edged sword, because what I tend to find is that I will spend most of my time sort of pulling my hair out from it and disentangling it. And more often than not, if I spend a lot of time moving my head or if my sort of shoulders are moving, it tends to sort of create some tangles in the back of my hair, which is uncomfortable after a while. So yeah, swings and roundabouts, lovely, snuggly and cozy, kind of a shit show at the back of my hair. But you know, you take it as you find it. In terms of knitting and working on this project, do you know what? It actually wasn't too bad. It was certainly a bit sluggy. I've mentioned in the past that bottom up is not my favourite technique. It certainly feels as though you're in this kind of never-ending sea of body before you get to the underarms. And I love seeing progress. I love feeling as though I'm getting somewhere with it. And so top down, you can really see that. You have the shape of the sweater and then you just need to persevere. Whereas with this, it feels like an awful lot of knitting for not very much reward until you get up to the top. So yeah, I appreciate there's different things that people enjoy, but this was a little bit sloggy for me. That being said, the sleeves went really, really quickly. The finishing, oh good God, the finishing took me forever. I usually can sort of weave in ends and sew up some seams and things in maybe a couple of hours at the end of the night. This took me 2 evenings because you have to, so there's seaming on the inside of the pockets here that needs done. So I should have checked to see which of the two of these I preferred before I showed you it. This one, they're about the same, to be honest, in terms of quality. So just a little bit of seaming along the bottom and the side there. But then you've also got to seam the underarm here. You've got seaming at the back of the neck to do, as I mentioned. And you can see that it's not quite blocked yet because it keeps sort of trying to fold in on itself a tiny bit on the front here, which I think blocking will definitely help and solve. So yes, it will sit slightly better once it's been blocked. But yeah, there was quite a lot of finishing to do. That said, the benefits that come from it in terms of snuggly bit at the back of the head, nice little pockets, you know, again, it's all in context, it's all good. It took longer than I was expecting. In terms of sizing, the pattern ranges from a 36-inch bust up to a 50-inch bust. So I will say it's not the most inclusive of patterns in that regard when it comes to sizing. I knit the size 44, which is roughly in the middle, and I do think 44 being in the middle is possibly not the greatest example. It means that I have pretty much kind of no ease with it, although again, as I say, this is a very forgiving textured stitch here, so I can sort of pull it and wrap it around me a little bit. Similarly, I do think it will grow a little bit more with blocking. My gauge was a tiny bit on the big side, and the reason for that is I used yarn that was maybe a little bit larger than the gauge is recommended in the pattern itself. The yarn I used to knit this sweater is Cascade Eco Plus in the spruce colourway. It is a lovely kind of dark emerald green colour. In terms of the yarn itself, I've mentioned in previous weeks that I don't fully support Cascade as a brand. If you want to understand the circumstances in a little bit more detail, I would recommend that you give it a Google. In terms of a very high level view, my understanding is one of the previous owners, or indeed one of the co-owners associated with the company a few years ago was found to have posted some very problematic statements in terms of her political support, her sort of socio and cultural beliefs and understandings on social media, and those are not perspectives that I agree with, and therefore I wouldn't wish to recommend necessarily this yarn to you. That being said, I've always said on this podcast that this is not about me telling you one thing or another. You are entirely at your own disposal to make your own choices. All I'm looking to do is just give you the context of my choices, and therefore if it's something you want to look into in a little bit more detail, you are entirely at your own leisure to do so. But yes, this is yarn that I've had in my stash since 2011 and back when I was doing a little bit of work over in Toronto. So this is yarn that I bought then, and certainly it's been sitting in my stash for a while, trying to work out what I wanted to do with it. And when the proposal came up that we would knit something in support of our wonderful friend, who is just a delight of a human being, I felt that this was a great opportunity to use this yarn for a better purpose. So yeah, really pretty happy with the way this has turned out. Looking forward to giving it a good blocking and indeed wearing it later on this week at Rhinebeck. Two very quick things that I neglected to mention. In terms of a needle size, I used a 5.5mm needle throughout, which is what the pattern recommends. It's what I used to get gauge, and as I mentioned, I didn't swatch exactly, but the little pocket squares that you have are really useful for just being able to check that you are roughly on gauge with what you're doing. This yarn came out ever so slightly bigger, and I do mean ever so slightly because the recommended gauge in the pattern is 16 stitches, over 4 inches, and I think I was getting somewhere just slightly under that, so in other words 15 and a bit. So I mean, it's ever so slightly larger. So with that, what I will do is obviously I will see where I'm at post blocking, but I'm expecting, given that it is fairly kind of snug and a little bit on the dense side at the moment, I'm expecting that to loosen up ever so slightly. In terms of yardage, that was the other thing I was going to mention. This is the third of the 3 hanks that I had obviously caked up, and for all that it may look as though I haven't touched this, there is maybe, I want to say, a quarter of this that I used in this sweater. So these are around about 478 yards. So my guess is I would put this somewhere between 1,000 to 1,100 yards used. I will weigh it and put the exact amount over on my Ravelry project page as ever, which I will create because it occurred to me that I don't actually have a project page for this just yet. But yes, I will put some more details about this over on the project page there. And so there you have it. That is my farmhouse cardigan. Moving along now into works in progress, and I will confess this formed the basis largely of my works in progress over the last couple of weeks, between the finishing, which I may have mentioned took quite a while, and indeed just getting the final bits of knitting done that I needed to finish off. This has taken a fair bit of my attention in the last few weeks, but of course I hear you say, Caroline, you're about to head off on holiday for the week or so, and so you're going to need some knitting to come with you, and you're not wrong. And indeed, I think this is not just kind of specific to me. I think it is a general sort of knitting crafting thing generally, which is when you finish a project, unless you have sort of something else lined up, it can be very difficult to pinpoint exactly what it is that you want to work on next. And I had a good few evenings of trawling, of weighing up different things in my mind, of looking at different patterns. I exhausted cabled sweaters on Ravelry because that was very much where my mindset was. I thought I could knit a hat. I didn't want to knit a hat. I thought I could knit a shawl. Didn't want to knit a shawl. Socks, didn't even enter into it because nope. But I thought long and hard, and eventually it dawned on me that there was already a sweater that I knew I really wanted to work on, and it was already a cabled sweater, and indeed it was already a cabled sweater that I'd talked about starting, and as it turned out had started, albeit incredibly slightly. So Those of you who've been watching since earlier on in the year may remember that I talked about the Sova Bellin sweater, and I will put a picture of it up here on the screen just to remind you. This is a pattern by Jessica Gore. It is a raglan top-down cabled sweater. It's knit in sport weight yarn, and it appeared in the Woods edition of Making Stories magazine. It's a really, really lovely sweater, and it is one that I think I mentioned earlier on. I was planning to do a bit of an informal cowl with my mum. That went very informally, as it would seem, at least on my part, on the basis that, yeah, I didn't really do that. Now, my mum did and cast on, and indeed finished it, and because my mum is a very good monogamous knitter, and because my mum is quite intent on getting things exactly right, not only did she finish her sweater, but I think in terms of the number of times she ripped back and fixed bits with the sweater, she probably knit it a good 4 times. And I don't think she'll be too upset at me for telling you that, because pretty sure that's about right, Mum. But certainly, I think, so I gave her my physical copy of Woods magazine, and she started working from that. So, you know, I didn't have the pattern to be able to work on it, but also I might have got distracted with other things. And so I had actually cast it on though, and I'd cast it on in yarn that I was very excited about, because what I really wanted was a cabled sweater in this kind of colourway and yarn. The colourway that I cast it on, and indeed the yarn that I cast it on with, is Durerum Natura. It's their Gilead base, which is their lovely sport weight base. It's a beautiful yarn, but it's basically a very similar colour to my shifted. It's pretty similar to some of these colours up here. In fact, one second. In fact, I can show you because it's in one of the cubbies just down here. It's not Gilead at all. It's the Ulissa base, and it is in this fabulous, fabulous kind of toffee caramel gold colourway, because gold, which is not, it's caramel. Yeah, I was going to say it's not on here. It is the caramel colourway, which is beautiful, but would have given me an almost identical sweater to my shifted. Yes, it's slightly different, it's a different shape, it doesn't have cables on the back, but broadly speaking, cabled sweater in this colourway, shifted. I mean, fair. So I decided that actually the row and a half that I'd knit in this, which was partly to help get my mum up to speed with a different type of cast on that we were using, I decided that I could probably live with ripping this out. As you can see, it did very little harm to this ball. And instead that I would cast on using something else. Now, I was looking at my stash. It is fairly sizable, as you can see, and having a bit of a think about what sweaters I had, what sweaters I felt were perhaps missing in my wardrobe, were there particular colours or kind of weights that I was missing, and eventually I realised that there was some yarn that I had been saving for a grandpa cardigan. Now, this is a beautiful pattern by Joji Locatelli. It's all over cables. It's a lovely, lovely cardigan, but the yarn that I was using, or the yarn that I was saving to knit that cardigan, was a very strong emerald green colour. Can you see where I'm going with this? Because I thought, what I'd really like is a green cardigan. Yeah, I can, yeah. I mean, yeah. So, realising that what I'd done was essentially do myself out of having that cardigan, I decided what better way to make amends than to go with using that cardigan for my Sova Bellin sweater. So, you know, there was logic. There were a good few evenings of trying to think this through and suss it out. And yeah, we got there in the end, I think. But let me share with you what it's looking like just now. Before we get to that, in fact, I should share that this is living in my beautiful hide and hammer bag that I shared with you on the previous episode. This is her gingerbread bag in the gingerbread canvas, and it is just stunning. I love this bag. I mentioned last time as well that Nu, who is the maker behind Hide and Hammer, is going to be at the Make Joy event in London next month at the start of November. Therefore, if you've been lusting after one of her bags and you are in the area, I highly recommend coming along and taking a look. Now, we covered off last time the fact that this is a very sizable bag, and indeed we covered off precisely what sort of size range we're talking about, in the sense that it is headline to, yeah, so hair to, yeah, we covered that last time. We don't need to go over old ground. But in here I have my very early and reasonably sort of early stage Sova Bellin sweater. You can see I've gone really far with this already. So yes, it's on quite a small circumference needle because I wanted to get it up and underway. In terms of the construction, just so you know, you cast on along the back of the neckline and a little bit over the raglan sort of sides here, over the sleeves, right just to the very kind of top, so either side here, and from there you knit back and forth a little bit, increasing as you go, until eventually you cast on the stitches for the front. So it's automatically got a bit of that neck shaping built in, which is fab. I am not only in the middle of the row, I'm in the middle of the row at the front where the cable pattern is, which makes it, you know, somewhat challenging to show you, but I'll give you a go nevertheless. So here is where I'm at so far. You can see there is a little bit of raglan shaping in here. So we've got, this is one of the raglan seams at the front. If I move it round, you can see the other raglan shaping. So this is my right shoulder. And then we have on the front here some of the cable pattern. So you can see there's a lovely rope braid that comes down the side there, and then some deep V's in the center. And then those cables are mirrored over on this side. So it is really, really lovely. Now, part of my reason for casting on this sweater, other than the fact that I committed to doing it already and totally forgotten about it, is because it's a really, just the construction of it is quite a good balance for travel knitting. So I'm someone who, for travel knitting, I like to have a few different options. So I say this is my travel knitting. This is one of a good probably 3 projects that I will have with me, because there is always the fear that you will run out of knitting, and that's been substantiated enough times for me to be genuinely quite apprehensive about it. But the good thing about this pattern is, because it is plain stockinette on both the sleeves and the back, actually you're only really paying attention to the cabled section down the front, and the cabled section down the front, once you get into the swing of it, is fairly intuitive. So it's a great mix of a pattern that can kind of hold your attention enough for you to be engaged with it and it not just be an endless sea of stockinette, but actually not so intensive that you're not able to hold conversations, you lose track of where you are. So it's a good balance in that regard. So very happy about that. In terms of the yarn, just to mention that a little bit more, because obviously it's a yarn that is in my stash, it's actually those few skeins here. So not the bottom row, not the next row up, but the ones just there. And these are old stash skeins that have been in here for quite a while. So let me hold a cake up so you can see. Here you go. So this is the yarn that I'm using. It is Madeline Tosh limited edition super soft DK in the Viridian colorway. Now, this is a base that was, as the name would suggest, limited edition. So somewhat unfortunately, I can't promise you at all as to whether or not it's still in the stock. It's something that will ever come back in. The colorway, obviously Madeline Tosh tends to repeat certain colorways over a phase of time, and then they're phased out and brought back. She certainly had a number of very strong greens the last time I looked in the store, but as I have mentioned on previous episodes, I haven't purchased from her in quite a while now. Now, obviously, they had some, I think, challenging times, and people were rightly challenging some of their perspectives earlier on in the year when it came to the racism and diversity conversations. I know they've sought to make amends. I will confess I haven't kept too much of an eye on them recently to know how they're doing against that, but as with the cascade, I would say you're obviously all entirely free to make your own choices. I just know that one, I'm trying to knit a little bit more from my stash at the moment, and two, I just want to make it clear that in using these yarns, I am using yarns that are appropriate for what I want to knit and yarns that are in my stash, and not necessarily yarns that I wholeheartedly recommend that you go out and purchase. I just want to make that abundantly clear. I hope I've done so. But as part of that, yeah, it's actually DK weight yarn. I mentioned the pattern calls for sport weight. In terms of sizing for this pattern, I believe it goes from a 36.5 inch bust up to a 54.5 inch bust. I will double check that. Almost right, so a 34.5 inch bust up to a 54.5 inch bust. Now, ideally, there'd be at least a couple of sizes either side of that range. I know certainly 54.5 inches isn't great. What I will say is the pattern is designed with 0 to 4 inches of ease, and so, you know, 0 inches of ease, if that's something you're comfortable with, means that it would fit busts of up to 54.5 inches. For me, I am doing it slightly differently. I'm knitting the size 42 inch bust. Now, bear in mind that I say bear in mind like you all know, oversharing. So my bust measures around about a 43.5, 44. And so what I'm actually doing is, because my yarn is a little bit thicker, I am, again, measuring my gauge as I go, not swatching. But what that's allowing me to do is, by knitting with slightly thicker yarn and on a needle size 1 up, so I'm knitting with a 4mm needle rather than a 3.75, so a 6 rather than a 5 US needle, I am knitting the sweater at a slightly larger gauge. Now, that will mean, because it's top down, I can stop wherever I like. I don't need to worry too much about having extra length, and because I'm hoping it will fit me slightly bigger, as long as I check my gauge as I go and make sure that the maths works out, I should end up with a slightly bigger sweater in a way where proportionally it doesn't feel too wildly different. Them's the theories. So we shall see how that works out. I will keep you posted. But yes, it means that I can use DK weight yarn for a sport weight sweater at a slightly different gauge. So the pattern gauge is actually 21 stitches to 4 inches. Now, this yarn is yarn that I can get 20 to 22 stitches per 4 inches quite comfortably on a 4mm needle, so I think it should be around about right. But then once you add in a little bit of stretch, because it's a superwash yarn, you get the picture. So essentially, I'm winging it a little bit, but I'm also checking my gauge as I go and being a bit sensible about it. And to be honest, if it ends up being slightly negative ease over my bust, I can live with that. So yes, I will be taking this with me later on this week as part of my travel knitting. Along with this, I am probably going to have another couple of smaller projects. I am contemplating a hat project, which may end up being another urban jungle. I really like the idea of having an urban jungle in grayscale, which would be just perfect for winter. And potentially, and I'm going to say it quietly, potentially some socks. I know. I'm pretty weirded out by that. One, because they make quite good gift knits and people have feet and all that stuff. And two, because I knit socks on 9mm circulars. No, I don't. I knit socks on 9-inch circular needles, and therefore just to have something that I can whiz along on quite happily, it's just kind of intuitive and little, and that could be my mindless project. So we'll see. I might end up, I might not. I might cast them on and never do anything with them, but we shall see. But certainly at the moment, this is the one thing that I've got on the needles. I will probably also have a bit of a think about my whips and see if there's anything there that I want to take. But I mean, let's be honest, that's not as fun. So there you have it. That is what I have been working on, and I think it's kind of fair to say that what I'm working on has also been the culmination of all of the pattern prettiness that I've been looking at over the last week. There have been some beautiful patterns, there have been some fabulous things that have caught my eye. I've also gone back over some of the patterns that I've recommended here on the podcast and contemplated, is this what I want to be knitting right now? The one other sweater that I was contemplating is one that you will have heard me talk about earlier on in the year, and that is the Sylvia sweater. It's a pattern by Sari Nordland. I'll put it up here on the screen just to remind you. As I say, I did talk about it a few episodes back. This is a sweater that when it was originally published, it was published as part of a publication, and therefore it wasn't available to be purchased online separately. It was published originally, I'm not sure which originally it was published in, but it was available in Swedish and Finnish. It's now available in English from the website. So if you go to the page on Ravelry, you'll be able to navigate through to the website where the pattern is. It's not a download, it's not a Ravelry download in the same way. It is free, which is amazing, but it is accessible through a third-party website associated with this publication. So I did think about that one. In the end, discounted it, partly because I think it is, again, there's a slightly different construction versus the Sovabellin, which is a top-down raglan, and therefore a piece of piss as far as constructions go. So yeah, that is pretty much the sort of knitting pattern prettiness contemplation that I've had this week. So apologies, that's going to be a little bit shorter than usual, but at the same time, I do fully anticipate that in coming back from Rhinebeck, I will be brimming with inspiration to share. As it is, we have a week left now until the end of our glorious Goldalong, and so I wanted to ensure that I was including a quick update of some of the other amazing pictures that you've been sharing of your projects, either still in progress or indeed the finished objects. So I will make sure that I'm including a gallery again this week. That will be coming up very, very shortly. But I also wanted to let you know that if you do want to see any more of the Glorious Goldalong projects, that obviously you have the Glorious Goldalong group, or rather the Glorious Goldalong thread in our Ravelry group, where you can see everything that everyone's been posting, and likewise the Glorious Goldalong hashtag on Instagram. And certainly after next weekend, after the 19th of October, I'm hopeful that there will be plenty of more pictures and projects to just go and fawn over gently after people share them, having worn them next Saturday. And so, with no further ado, let me give you the latest instalment of our Glorious Goldalong projects. They are all absolutely stunning, and I cannot wait to see some of these in person and just have an opportunity to fawn over them then. So this week I was showcasing projects from our Ravelry thread. Last time round it was from Instagram, and I think next time it will probably be a little bit of a mix of both just to celebrate that. But as ever, a huge thank you to everyone for taking part. The fact that you've embraced this just makes me so incredibly happy. I should have mentioned this slightly earlier on up front, and I will be talking about it in a subsequent episode, but if you have got to the end of the Glorious Goldalong and thought, you know, this was great, but either, you know, one, oh, it's come to the end, I don't really have the motivation anymore, or two, gold is just not your thing, has never been your thing, fear not, because, say it quietly, the blamed dunderknit along is not far away. So, if there is something deep in your heart that you have been coveting and just waiting for the opportunity to cast it on, just hold out a little bit longer, okay? We'll get you there. We'll get you there. It'll be fine. And so there we have it for this week. A little bit lighter on content perhaps than usual, but at the same time, it's quite a lot of shit that needs doing on my side, so apologies. But as ever, a huge thank you to all of you for watching. I really, really appreciate it. For everyone that left comments last time round, you are absolute superstars, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And for those of you that are looking forward to Rhinebeck, ooh, drink, and indeed having an opportunity to catch up with friends, with people that perhaps you've never met before in real life, and there are a few of those that I'm getting to meet this time round, and I could not be giddier about it. Stacey of Stress Knits, I am slow motion running for you like there is no tomorrow. So yes, look, have wonderful, wonderful weeks. If you're not at Rhinebeck and you want the chance to sort of embrace it vicariously, there will be all the hashtags on Instagram. We'll have the Goldalong thread up there. If you want to ignore it and pretend like it never happened, I totally get it. There is no fear of missing out over here. And similarly, if you want an opportunity to pretend that you were there and take some of the benefits from it in a way that works best for you, please do feel free to join the Vicarious Rhinebecking giveaway over on our Ravelry group. But all that really remains, as ever, is for me to wish you a fabulous rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting keeps you happy and fulfilled, but if for whatever reason it doesn't, I hope you have the opportunity to knit vicariously. Keep on keeping on, and I will see you again very soon. Bye. And so here we, oh good, okay, I didn't realise this t-shirt was quite that see-through. That's excellent. I was going to say the farmhouse boobs, and then I realised that you actually could kind of see that this is, yeah, this is quite bad. Okay, yeah, so this is a great opportunity to be showing far more than I intended on the internet. Let's see if we can sort of just manage this a little bit better, shall we? And we are holding the cardigan. Do you know what? The one time this fucker needed buttons. The one time. And here we are. And everyone's there saying, do you know what, Caroline? Should have used the buttons. Yeah, should have used the buttons. Or had a t-shirt that wasn't see-through. This is, oh my. As ever, we have our glorious oh, hello. Yep, just spotted that again. Okay. Just gonna wear this cardigan like a dressing gown. I'm pretty sure that's the way it's intended to be worn. Yeah, this is totally fine. Definitely not flashing my boobs at people on the internet. And if that's the moment at which you've joined this week's podcast, hi. Not a thing that I'm intending. I mean, last week we were measuring things using our nipples as a guideline. This week we're going further than I intended to, and that wasn't really part of the plan. The worst part in all of this is I've totally worn this t-shirt to work. Yep. I've got nothing more to add. Just, yeah.